106.5 FM and online. It's the After 5 Guest with Wyn Thomas.
When you look at Welsh rugby, there are legends that have been created. One of those legends is the Pontypool front row. One of the members of that front row was Charlie Faulkner. Charlie wrote a biography before his death with the help of my guest tonight, as I say, is Greg Lewis. Greg, thanks for your company today. Let's start with this question about Charlie's age, which is always the question asked. Can you shed some light on that for us?
Yes, I mean, it was one of the dominated debates of his career, really. How old was he? How did he manage to get picked for Wales at the age that he did? I mean, essentially, he was a man who was completely dedicated to his craft, and he spent a long time just in various clubs, getting better and better, always, talking to the opposition packs about his play, and he was always, I think in his mind, he was always determined that he might get to play for Wales. And when he actually did, he was nearly 34, which today seems pretty remarkable, I think. He was weeks short of his 34th birthday, although he had, at the time, Bobby Windsor told me actually, that players were told very often to take several years off their age, and Charlie had certainly done that, but his teammates didn't even know how old he was. He was very, very fit, and that's the key to it. He was a very hard-working player. He worked in the steelworks, so he was very fit from his work. He trained and trained and trained, often with Bobby Windsor, who worked with him at Whitehead, the steelworks in Newport. So, by the time he came to play for Wales, he was pretty much at the peak of his game, really, I think, from what he'd learned and from his fitness, despite that advanced age.
So many clubs, you said. So Pontypool wasn't his first-class club, was it? There was another club before that.
Well, that's right. I mean, essentially what happened to Tony, obviously we call him Charlie in the rugby world, but to Tony was that he went to work for Whitehead Steelworks straight from school. Mm-hmm. And he was actually a very... judo was his first love at the time, sports-wise. And he carried on. He became a champion at judo for Wales. But he started playing rugby at Whitehead. And then he sort of had to choose between the two, really, judo and rugby. And he chose rugby. He played for Newport Saracens. Cross Keys then was a key move for him. Mm-hmm. Where he really learnt a lot more of his craft. Although he enjoyed playing there. Although they were struggling, teams in those days would actually struggle to get a full team, and they'd be paying people on the quiet they'd be picking them up on the way to games and saying, we need to pick up these two guys to make sure we got 15 when we get to the match, But he learnt a lot at Cross Keys. But then, of course, Pontypool was where everything came together for him.
First time in a Welsh shirt was in 1974 for an uncapped game, where I believe he was recommended by John Dawes while playing against London Welsh for Pontypool.
Well, kind of, yes. He had, it was interesting because obviously Pontypool had a reputation by then. The Pontypool front row had come together, and they had a couple of games where there was a lot of controversy, and one of those had been against London Welsh, where John Dawes had not been happy with the way he felt that the Pontypool players had expressed themselves physically. But then as soon as John Dawes had the chance and he took over at Wales, he immediately put Graham, Bobby and Charlie together. So despite, I suppose, his misgivings when he was in opposition to them, as soon as he had a chance to have them on his side, he wanted that to happen. And then, so that was an uncapped game they played there. But what happened then was that, and Gareth Edwards sort of told me this as well, but Charlie was definite about this, was that Gareth Edwards was so impressed with the three of them being together, and the way they held the pack together and allowed him to play. He then sort of said to the selectors, look, I'd really like these three his three boys together. At that time Wales were regrouping a little bit. We had that. The early 70s had come to an end. John Dawes had come in, regrouping for the 75 Five Nations, and Charlie always felt that Gareth Edwards speaking up for them was what got him over the line with regards to his age, because there was a definite negativity amongst some of the selectors, I think, that he was too old. But obviously Gareth speaking up for him was obviously very effective, because they came together in 75 very successfully.
Yeah, that debut, of course, goes against France in Paris in 1975. A game they were not expected to win because of all those changes. A rain-soaked ground, and our famous Graham Price try, which Charlie arrives nearly the same time as Graham Price, doesn't he?
Yes, that's right. Well, I think this is what's amazing, really. I mean, it was a tremendous occasion, that game, I think, because, as you say, the Welsh press and the Welsh public, full of expectations, as is general, but they weren't too sure what the team was going to perform like. And you had six debutants that day. You had Graham Price, you had Charlie, you had Trevor Evans, John Bevan,
wow,
Ray Gravel, and Steve Fenwick. So it was a really different lineup. But yes, Graham scored, and Charlie was always proud that in all the photographs of the try, obviously Charlie's right up there with him. And I think that speaks to his fitness again, in a way, because obviously Graham had about 10 years on, 10 years on Charlie. He was a much younger man. But Charlie was right up there with him. And that was very much, he was pretty much obsessed with fitness, in a way. He really spent a lot of time thinking about it, and he made a certain science of the scrum as well, and part of that was the fitness. And of course that day they were playing a pretty tremendous French side with a really strong and pretty brutal pack.
Yeah. So let's move on to the Grand Slam of 1978. That sees Phil Bennett and Gareth Edwards play their last games for Wales. But Charlie continued after then, didn't he, as well?
Yeah, he did. I mean, things were starting, by the time we get to 78 and we have, players like Phil Bennett leaving the squad, things are starting to change. But, Charlie played on. He played on three games in the 79 Five Nations. But by the time we get there, we lost Phil Bennett, we've lost Gareth Edwards, we lost Gerald Davis. So that second flourish, that amazing time that we'd enjoyed during the 70s, and in that second half of the 70s, where we'd won the Five Nations, so many times. 75 we did the Grand Slams, three triple crowns in a row. You felt like it. I think Charlie, looked around the dressing room and felt this is the end of an era now. A lot of the faces had changed, and it was all coming to an end. And by that time, Charlie had lost his place in 77. The talk about his age had gone around again. He was dropped at the beginning of the 77 championship. They realised they'd made a mistake. They called him back up, but unfortunately he'd been injured. But that was the start of really, he was getting on then. He was, by the 79 tournament, he was 38 pretty much. So there was time to give up then. But it was hard for him, because it's very hard for us who haven't played professional sport to realise what that means when you stop feeling the roar of the crowd. It's really everything.
But he got to wear the Lions shirt because he was obviously called up to the Lions tour of 1977. He didn't play in a test. At least he got to wear the shirt, didn't he? And the Pontypool front row had all had Lions shirts on that particular day. So that was brilliant, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that for him, that was possibly one of his proudest moments, I think, because, like I said, he'd been dropped early that year by Wales, recalled, but he was then injured, so he'd missed all of the Five Nations that year. He worked so hard to get back to fitness, and then the Lions were suffering so many injuries over in New Zealand that he got the call, and he was absolutely delighted to go out there. Bobby had sort of gone into bat for him, so to speak, with the management out on the tour, and said, if you bring anybody else out, they'll know they're not going to get in the test, and they won't give their all for you, you know. But he said Charlie will play any match, wherever it is, and always give 100%. And that's exactly what he did. So having the three of them, like you say, in the Lions shirt, represent the Lions was, I think, probably Charlie's proudest moment in rugby.
Yeah, so there's lots in the book, but lots more I got to follow. But the All Blacks game in '78, because he retires then, as you say, he's aged about 38. But of course he continues to coach Newport, and of course that association with the famous Spiky Watkins as well, isn't it? So he's still in the game, even then.
Well, yes, because although he retired from Wales sort of 38, he did play the odd game. He went into coaching Newport. He still played when he could, and he carried on playing for various sort of invitation teams. But then Spike Watkins, quite a controversial, quite a character.
Yeah.
But Charlie was a very good friend of his. And when he started coaching Newport, the first player he wanted to get over there from Cardiff was Spike. So he worked very hard to sort of lure Spike across to Newport, and as Charlie says in the book, you know, Spike didn't really get on with any committee. He didn't like the Newport committee, but he didn't really like any committee then. And so Charlie went over to Spike's house, or invited him over to his house, and laid on the biscuits and the tea, and said, you know, will you come to Newport? And Spike said, look, no, I don't want to come to Newport. And he even started saying, I don't like the kit, you know. And then as he was leaving, Charlie said, look, if you won't play for Newport, will you play for me? And Spike looked at him and said, yeah, I won't play for Newport, but I'll play for Charlie Faulkner.
Charlie Faulkner, the team.
RFC. Yeah. So, and Spike, you know, that they remained really good friends. Charlie had friends from rugby for the whole of his life, if you know what I mean. Charlie was he was different than you'd expect off the field. I think, you know, to me there seemed to be two people. There was Charlie Faulkner, the rugby player, who was tremendously aggressive and some might say brutal at times. That probably wouldn't be controversial to say. But then Tony was a gentleman, you know, a real soft-hearted gentleman. So I think his friendships lasted forever, you know. So
you obviously started writing this book with him, and then obviously sadly passed away. So is that how it happened? Were you already working on a book when he left us?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what happened. I mean, essentially, I met Charlie through. I didn't intend to write his book at all. And, I met him through a mutual friend who was a rugby player too, and said, "Will you come and talk to Charlie?" And so I went to do that. And Charlie had thought about writing the book, and I think his family were very keen that he was. But he was a very humble man, and I don't think he ever thought he was going to do it. So yes, we started. I interviewed him. We started writing together, and we were well on with it. All the interviews were done, and then sadly, about this time last year, Charlie started to feel unwell. He'd been very, very fit. He was still swimming and walking every day, and then sadly he died earlier this year. So the one sadness about it is that obviously he didn't get to see the book.
Didn't see the book. Yeah.
The nice thing is that he's got a lovely large family, and for them it's been a very special thing to see his words, in print.
Well, that's the book. It's called Charlie Faulkner, The One and Only, and it's obviously paid by a law firm. Greg, thanks so much for your company this afternoon. It's an absolute delight to talk to you. I love reminiscing on Welsh rugby. It's absolutely fantastic.
My pleasure, Wayne. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks very much indeed. Okay.